It is happening. But now the problem is, I explained to you very briefly and tell you to read the paper about where the 20% come from. But if you really bring it to your parents and your grandmas about this and try to install this like phone app for them, yes, it is very easy to use, but they're still mostly going to think it's a scam, right? They're not going to know what is staking fees and what is 2x collateral. They're not going to buy that. So in trying to do this exercise of really trying to explain to them what it means, as my job is an academic, I end up using this analogy. So the analogy is if you put money in a proof of stake network to allow staking, then to allow the validators to do the job, in a way it's a bit like you are investing into a banking infrastructure, right? So bankers make a lot of money on Wall Street, and why they make a lot of money? Well, they have the money in the institution, which allows them to do this banking job. So in DeFi, essentially, if you have $10, you're a $10 banker. If you're $100, you're a $100 banker. So the 20% rate essentially is the banker's cut, right? So you actually earn that money because you're making, by delegating to validators to do the job, you're facilitating the efficiency and security of a banking protocol. So you're actually contributing. So the 20% is not given to you for free. You are actually playing the banker's role, so you deserve the banker's cut. And of course, we know that bankers don't stick the money, but they eat a lot of steaks. They breathe a lot of oxygen, and they eat animals that also breathe a lot of oxygen. So you can think of it not just as a money you deserve, you're also doing it in an environmentally friendly way, because you're replacing part of the banking industry that is highly energy inefficient and highly bad for the environment. They fly a lot in those buildings, whereas you are doing it in a way that is energy efficient. So all that is very well, but you might think, well, I'm talking about these 20% fixed income, and we know that fixed income, 20%, may not be so good anymore because of inflation, right? So if I tell you UST would be the money that you're doing on Anchor, is pegged to the US dollar, but who knows whether US dollar would still mean the same thing in 10 years. So I was trying to say that it will be sustainable for the long term. And that's one reason why we are also partnering with Frax. These are my friends from LA. They have one of the top 10 biggest algorithmic stablecoin now. And Sam from Frax always promised that when they hit a certain market cap, they will start doing this stablecoin that is not pegged to US dollar, but pegged to purchasing power. So they're basically creating a consumer price index, and then their stablecoin is actually pegged to that real purchasing power. So it's inflation adjusted. Right, so we have another on-chain project called ONE that is doing the same thing. It's more native to our ONE, is collateralized by our ONE token. So with this token and the kind of 20% yield, what happens is, if you think you can survive on, let's say, $20,000 a year, you think $20,000 is a good basic income. It's not great, but you can probably survive with that. That means that you only need $100,000 as a one-time down payment, one-time endowment, and assume that the 20% rate would sustain, then you don't have to care about inflation. You get $20,000 worth of real purchasing power, and that lasts as long as the crypto space will continue to have proof of stake networks, essentially. If you don't think 20% is good, okay, you might add a little bit, right? So you might assume that it might drop to 15%, you might think 20%, $20,000 purchasing is not good enough, okay, maybe you need $200,000. But $200,000 suddenly sounds like a lot more manageable than funding someone for life, right? I mean, with these systems, you're actually talking about a price that seems to become more approachable. Now, I know that I promised to talk about DBI, but end up selling you a financial product. It seems a little bit of sleight of hand. I understand that. This is not true UPI, but with this product and up to this point, I think we can see where the path forward could be. Now it's not very inclusive, right? You need to have some money down. You need to put down $200,000, which some of you have. Then you are sorted for life. You can also give that to someone else, right? So it's very nice. But maybe we can talk about how we can actually cough up or find that money in the first place to allow a lot of people to benefit, as many as we can. And the idea is, well, basically, as an authentic, real person, you're worth something. Economically, I'm not talking about in a tree-hugging, kind of blue sky kind of fashion. I'm talking about economically, you are justified to deserve some money. And the argument should not be to unfamiliar to us in the Ethereum community, right? We talk about quadratic voting, quadratic funding. I mean, at the bottom of it, what it means is basically this, right? If you don't need to care about who people are and just want some sort of funding or voting, the easiest thing to implement is $1, one vote, right? So I don't need to know who you are. I don't need to know whose account is it. If you want to fund this project, then give me the money. Or if you want to vote something, then it's $1, one vote. So the people who have more stake can vote more. But we don't like that. We don't like to, we don't hate the whales, but we don't want them to basically run everything. We think oligarchy is intrinsically not so good. And so on the other hand, we have one person, one vote. And that's why kind of quadratic voting and quadratic funding essentially is about. We try to make the smaller users, give them a bigger voice. Right. But the problem is now the whales are also very smart. So if I were a whale, I would now split my $10 million into maybe 10 million accounts or $1 each. Then I can get the quadratic boost, right? And right now, there are some ways to stop people from doing that, but maybe not ideal enough. So essentially, ultimately, we would like to have really respect the consciousness of each person, because if you're, as a human being, unlike a bot, even a very sophisticated bot that can create all these social history, a person is intrinsic in that you do not like to be screwed over. Right? If the central authority really implements something that is really against your interest, at some point you would not turn a blind, you would stand up to it. And I think that is something that actually is not just noble and cool, but it's actually intrinsic to the source of security in a decentralized network. So to make it more concrete, we can talk a bit about Harmony. So we, some of you don't know what we are. We can think of ourselves as a bonsai plant version of ETH 2.0. So we are basically a sharded proof-of-stake network. So we have a lot of tech that is similar to what ETH 2.0 would look like. And so one thing that we face as a problem is that the proof-of-stake is actually very cool, is environmental friendly, but the problem is we have to set a certain entry point for people to become validators. So if they have nothing at stake, and then they can just like go in and validate transactions, then what if they just do something very crazy and that would threaten the security of the network? So unlike in proof of work, you actually invest computational power and time and energy, then it's less likely for you to do something that is not in your interest. Whereas for proof of stake, the way to go is to actually make sure that you actually will have to put down some stake in the network first. So right now they create a kind of entry-level requirement that is pretty high. We already try our best to make this level lower. We try to use an algorithm called effective proof of stake. But still, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars for you to be eligible to become a validator. And this problem is only going to get worse because we know that with zero-knowledge proof, stateless clients, the technology for the technical requirement for being a validator is only going to go down. You're going to need cheaper and smaller computers. So essentially, how much money you have would become a very central bottleneck. But I think we can maybe solve this problem by thinking about the worth of genuine human identity. So right now, to solve these problems, people, as I mentioned, you can use your social history, social media activity, or someone else can vouch for you, and these do great. But if you're really talking about security, we know that the best security really is government registry, right? Like social security number, your passport, birth certificate, those are much more will give you better security. And this is a paper that actually goes through some of the analysis and show that if you actually have real national government identity registry to prove that every user is a real person and no one person can have two accounts on your network, this can make a really secure network. And some people do that, so we can use zero-knowledge proof to submit your identity and make sure that it is kind of encrypted within the network. But people tend not to feel very comfortable with that idea because still you're trusting a central authority. So one proposal here may be that you can do it with the validators. So the validators, you have many validators because eventually the technical requirement below. So if you're a user in the network, you prove your activity in the network, you're a valuable user, and you can choose to CK prove your identity, that is CK KYC, with a validator of your choice that you think is trustworthy. And that validator might be someone you have met in real life. And there's some network analysis that if we do, then we can show that this would make a scale-free network. because no validator would attract all the people to do KYC with them. You presumably want to choose someone close to you, you've heard of some good reputation, that can give you a very secure network. So I'm running out of time. I'm not going to go into the details, but just to give you an insight, there's an interesting point here that for us for networks to want to pay people to do these kind of identity proof, in fact, you would think that small networks would have a high incentive to do that. Because small networks have fewer validators, it's easier for people to cyber attack. So actually, if anything of these kind would come up, it might not come up on really big networks, because really big networks are already secure. They may not care as much. Whereas small networks are somewhat more desperate, so we are more likely to make this kind of DPI happen. So I left out all these details because I don't have time, but I also learned that as a professor, you don't always need the details. What you need is to train a lot of really smart people, and then they can come up with the details. So this is my approach, is that we are running an online course on zero knowledge proof with a very strong focus on fairness as well. So fairness is one of our key topics. We've been running it for the past 2 months, so the pilot cohort just started. My CEO is down there. We were just debating whether it should be 1,000x or more. We now make it 1,000. We make it 1,000 people this year first. This is our goal. We want to train 1,000 people who can program, who can make products using zero knowledge proof. And he's been urging me to add one more zero, and I will do that in a few years. But this year is 1,000 first. And the way we do it actually is interesting. It relates back to the DBI idea. So how do we dare to train 1,000 developers who are not there? The idea is we pay people to learn to go through this course. This already run through a pilot. This is different from a scholarship because a scholarship is based on your past achievement, right? And this isn't. This is much more inclusive. You can come with no achievement you've ever made. You might not have even finished college or high school, but if you can finish a piece of assignment, I give you a few $100. So it's all incentive for the future work. And so far it has worked very well. So within the course of two months, if you're really outstanding, you can earn up to $10,000. And we also pay our TAs really very generously, like assistant professors. We are actually committing to this $10 million for grants. So why I talk about this? Well, again, small networks, maybe we are more likely to do this sort of stuff. I should just really wrap up, but let me say one last thing, which is that there are many other projects that do DBI, and they are much more developed. They're much more like UBI than we are. We don't see ourselves as a competition. We are beginners. But I think one thing I've learned from Youth Conference is from this great guy, Griff Green, who talked about how we should incentivize good deeds. Basically, I think our approach is similar to other people's, but what we really want to happen is we want to make UBI something that is lucrative. We want you to, even if you're very selfish and very self-serving, and I want you to like UBI because it is good for your network security. So I should wrap up. So chat with me. I'll be at the Harmony booth. And tomorrow we have another talk, and we can talk about everything else, like my work outside of crypto. Let's have a beer tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Hakwan Lau, the coolest professor